Buddy? So that's not what you're doing first anyway. What are you doing? Okay, everybody. We have word from Launceston that they can see and presumably hear us now, which is good. So that's always a good trigger to start a lecture, is that people can hear me. Just waiting on people to settle down at the back there. Maybe my voice takes longer to travel to you, the instruction to be quiet, not sure. Don't think sound works that way, at least not that slowly. Excellent. Okay, so let's get started with something relatively important, I guess, to you guys, is your assessment item. You'll have seen that assignment 1 is out on Milo. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly here, but hopefully you've already read this and maybe already have an idea. At this point, since it's due next Friday, if you don't have an idea already, you should start thinking of an idea, because the content that we're hopefully going to get to in this lecture, or at least definitely will get to... Excuse me guys, I'm definitely started the lecture, and I believe I'm the only one supposed to be talking at this point. So if you don't have an idea, start thinking about that, because the content we're going to start to cover, you should be thinking about your idea in the back of your head and how you might answer some of the questions that the content will pose of you while I go through it. So I'm going to pose some questions. I'm not going to get you to answer in terms of your assignment right now or in the discussion, but think about these questions, because this is the sort of stuff you need to write about in your 500 to 750 word essay that goes with your sketch. So even though the assignment is titled a sketch, just handing in a piece of paper that has a scribble on it is not going to get you 5% of your marks, surprisingly. The majority of this assignment is actually about the words that you write, so it's almost ironic, if irony is the right term here, to call this assignment the sketch. It's more about tell me your idea and describe how your idea will work. So aside from not having any content in week 1, I'm deliberately avoiding talking about examples within our assignment theme just yet, because I don't want to influence your ideas. I want you to go out there, if you are struggling for ideas to match the assignment theme, go out and do some research of your own. Post those links on the discussion board if you find something super interesting for other students. But ideally, as we go on through semester, I will present some information relevant to the theme. But I'm not doing it yet because I don't want to tarnish your ideas. I want you to come up with something. Because if I went ahead and went to some web page about some kind of exercise gadget, I don't want everyone to write about that gadget. I don't want that to happen. This assignment is useful for subsequent assignments, so you should give it a red hot go. Having said that, you're not locked into using your assignment 1 ideas at all for assignment 2. We talked a little bit last week about all the assessments and how this is an individual assignment. You're coming up with an idea each, and it'll be a useful part of the start of assignment 2 where you'll bring all of those ideas together and perhaps think about what might be the best one, what might be a good combination of ideas to work for assignment 2 in your group, or you can throw it all out, start again. It doesn't matter. For this assignment, I fully want you to think outside the box. That's totally fine. The more you think outside the box, the more difficult it might be to justify some of your decisions, but still, come up with something creative, that's fine. you won't be marked down for being creative. If anything, you'll be marked up for coming up with something a little bit out there, a little bit left field, as best we can within the marking scheme. So for those of you who don't know what our theme is Get Moving at Work, and I've shown this last week. It's pretty broad, and deliberately so that you can come up with lots of different ideas. The idea is to get people to do some form of exercise in the workplace. So we're not talking about people sneaking in some exercise before they go to work or afterwards at the gym where it's convenient for them, but rather trying to get some exercise in during the day. People spend 8 hours at work often. Maybe they take a little break for lunch, but they spend a lot of time sitting, and it's not good for you. So research some of the things that are out there to suggest why you might want to get moving at work. So that's part of your motivation for this assignment, and how you might combat this problem. How might you motivate people to get moving? Motivate is a pretty key word there that you might use in your research on this. I know it's only a small assignment and you don't have a lot of time to undertake this research, but do some for this assignment because it'll help you, because you need to do research for assignment 2. So that's the theme. The workplace is pretty broad. A lot of people will probably go straight towards office workplaces, so sitting down in front of a computer. That's fine. It's honestly fine. I don't mind. But you can decide to go a little bit out there and think about other kind of workplaces. People work in a lot of different workplaces. So I'm not prescribing that it's an office space at all. The idea is that you'll develop a sketch that communicates to your marker what your idea is. So you'll have a high-level description of what your idea is, and in doing so, so try and get across what your idea is and how users will interact with your idea. So your idea might be a gadget, could be a piece of hardware, but it needs to be something that people interact with, because we're talking about human-computer interaction. The key part here is that it's something that people interact with. It could be an app. It doesn't have to be screen-based at all. It doesn't have to be a web page. It doesn't have to be an application that someone's installed. It could be a gadget that people can interact with in some way. But I'm trying not to give examples because I don't want to give you examples at this point. So it's a little bit tricky. If you're struggling with this, then I'm more than happy to talk to you in my consultation, and the tutors as well. There will be opportunity in this week's tutorial to talk about your idea with other students and the tutors as well. When you've got your idea, or when you're thinking about your idea, you need to think about who you're designing the experience for. So who are your target audience? What is the workplace that your target audience will be interacting with your gadget or prototype? Or let's use the word artifact for now, because it's very broad. It can be anything. So your thing, I don't want to say the word thing, so we'll say artifact. It sounds much more academic. So what is the workplace that people will use your artifact in? Where, when, how, and why will they use it? And what are the implications of these variables? I've put that in italics because it's effectively the main thing that I want to see you think about in this assignment. So if people are using this in a workplace and your gadget revolves around yelling out a foghorn every 5 minutes to get people to stand up, it's probably not suitable for an office environment. So you would consider using a different kind of cue in your artifact that's not a foghorn. It's a really extreme example, and you'll find that I like to do a lot of those because I'm a very simple-minded person. But that's the sort of thing, is think about the context. What is acceptable in the workplace that you're talking about? What is required, maybe by law or socially, things like that. The variables of where and when, so is it that they're going to use it every 5 minutes? Are they going to use it every 10 minutes? Are there no constraints on this? Is it every hour? And why are you making these decisions? There's a lot you can talk about here in 500 to 750 words, and I imagine if you really delve into this topic of what are the implications of these variables, you'll probably struggle to not go over the word limit. So try and keep it concise. And don't go too much on a tangent on one particular aspect of the context. Try and cover a lot of ground. Right? So it's a pretty broad assignment. for a 5% here. That's why it's only 750 words. I added this part here about demonstrating what has already been done in the past. So you will draw inspiration, no doubt, from existing artifacts. So if you can reference those in some way, talk about how yours differs, particularly with respect to the context that you are designing for, that would be good. An example here is if you're using sensor equipment. So even by me mentioning sensor equipment, a bunch of students who have emailed me with their ideas have talked about sensor equipment in their idea, and that's totally fine. It's totally fine. But it's an example of how I've sort of poisoned the well, if you like. Think about how your prototype or artifact might need to sense data and work out if existing sensors exist for this. If existing sensors don't exist for what you're doing, that's totally fine. This is a conceptual idea. It doesn't have to be a seat that can detect that we're sitting. It doesn't have to be something that does exist, because those do exist. You could have something that senses something that doesn't exist. It can be completely made up. This assignment is completely made up, but the points do matter. The marks do matter. No one gets that reference at all? Yeah, a couple of people. Thank you. Thank you for the slight nod. Okay, so yeah, research and reference existing material. If you're unsure of the suitability of your idea, then have a chat with myself or your tutors. Just instructions then. It's individual, so even though this will possibly be the basis of group work, you should do this individually and have unique ideas to the people. So some of you probably already have your groups sorted out for assignment 2. Don't all come up with the same idea, because part of the start of assignment 2 is working out from different ideas what's the best one. And also I'm going to be pretty mad if a group of people just submit the same assignment. More than pretty mad. I will report you for academic misconduct. I've done that in the past. I always do. So some of you, this might be your first year at uni. We very much frown upon academic misconduct in the form of just taking someone else's homework and changing it even a little bit, and we have systems to detect this. It's an important thing, and they make us talk about this every year, but this is an individual assignment. Can't say it any clearer than that. You should include at least one diagram for this sketch, because the assignment is called a sketch, but if you think that you can convey your entire idea in a single sketch, then you only need to do one diagram, and it doesn't even have to be of a particularly high quality. The reason I say that is because you'll see it's not worth a lot. The main thing is that you are able to communicate what your idea is. So if someone reads your assignment, your marker reads this assignment and has no idea at all what your idea is, then you'll lose marks, because you're not communicating your idea properly. Hello to the person from Launceston who said something on Discord. I haven't asked for any discussion yet, but I hope that later on in the lecture there will be good discussion again from Launceston. It was awesome last time. You should do a short essay, maximum 750 words long. Look, I'm not going to be completely crazy with that word limit, but don't go well over that. Anything over 900 words and you're way too crazy, but don't take that as the word limit is now 900 words. Try and aim for 750. Ironically, this sentence has weird extra commas while trying to tell you that you should use proper English. Try and make it make sense. Font size doesn't even matter because it's not a page limit. For goodness sake, who wrote this? Not me. The referencing, yes, you should reference. I honestly don't mind what style you use as long as you're consistent. If you're just throwing URLs randomly into your text, then that's not a particularly good style. But choose a style. There are guides online. So when you're referencing existing work, you should try and you should find references for that. I've had a student ask me about whether or not a lot of existing products and stuff, a lot of them don't have articles that are in academic literature. They often only found news articles. First, I might say have a bit more of a look and you might find an academic source, but when you're looking at existing software or products or things like that, and all you can find is a news article or the website promoting that thing, I'm fine with that being your reference. Okay? But however, if you're making some kind of assertion that you know, it's important that we get a certain amount of exercise every day, and you come up with some number, you should reference that assertion. Okay, this is an essay, so do that. Submit your assignment to Assignment 1 Dropbox with your username in it, please. I don't care the format, Word or PDF is fine. In terms of the marking scheme, this is the weighting of the different components. So like I said, the sketch is only worth 5%. It's not actually, we're not here to go, you have really amazing drawing skills or anything like that. The sketch is there to complement the rest of the text, to communicate your idea. So, you know, as long as this is actually a good sketch, this is easy marks. 5% of a 5% assignment. You've got to describe why on earth you've come up with your idea. What's the motivation for this? And that motivation isn't just Lindsay gave us an assignment to do this. The motivation is whatever you can find in the literature to suggest that people should get moving, or talk about what the current needs are of your existing target audience. We'll talk more about this. So a lot of what I'm saying here, there's holes in what we're saying because we haven't had slides or content about this. This whole assignment is a fairly common sense sort of thing. This whole unit is a lot of common sense, not so common. But we'll fill in some of the holes as we go on, and I'm going to try and do that, you know, before your assignment's due. So you need to provide a motivation for what the current problems are and how your gadget or artifact will support that. A high-level description of how it will operate, and in particular, not just how it will operate. So talking about how it would operate sort of implies a technical description. You're welcome to include a bit of a technical description, but you don't have a lot of space. The things that we care about is how the end user will interact with your system. And finally, a description of the context in which your artifact will be used. So really referencing the when, how, where, and why users interact with your artifact. And that's worth 40% of the assignment, so it's a fair bit. Now, I've provided effectively 4 headings here. This isn't to say that you have to have these 4 headings in your assignment. Your markers, either me or whoever it's going to be, should be smart enough to read your 750 words and assess whether or not you have covered a motivation, a high-level description, and a context. So perhaps the entire way through doing a high-level description, you are constantly referring to the context. Just because you don't have a context section doesn't mean you won't get marks for providing context, because your marker will be able to work this out. So I don't want just these headings. Even though it makes it easier for us to mark, I'm sort of putting myself in it here and saying, provide this information. If you feel comfortable doing these headings, then you can do it that way as well. I don't care. But don't feel constrained to ignoring context entirely until the end. And finally, I'll just point out the CRA, but not go through it in any large detail. One thing that I've done for you is bold out the words that distinguish the different levels of the CRA. And I haven't changed this CRA hugely from last year, so a lot of the words are quite subjective in many ways, but that's just how this is marked. You need to be comprehensive, you need to have well thought out motivation, you need to provide an insightful. What's the difference between insightful and informative? I guess that's down to the marker to decide, but we will err on the side of insightful, so we're not going to mark you in a mean way. But it's more the difference between a pass and a HD is that you've actually thought about the context. So looking at this wall of text, hopefully what you'll see from this is that the difference is how well you can describe the context and the environment in which your artifact will be used. And also the fact that you've used academic references. they're the main differentiations between a pass and an HD in this. So in theory, you could just come up with an idea, submit that, and you get a pass. You won't have learned anything, and you'll have gotten 2.5%. Okay. Any questions about this spec? Have most people got an idea at this point? No? No? So have a think about this area. Have a research online. Like I said, I'm not going to sit up here and give you ideas. Okay? Talk to other students, talk to people who do have ideas, talk to your tutor when you get a chance as well, because that's the best environment for this. There'll be allocated time for that this week. So in terms of the plan for this week, we got to the end, we got to like slide 4 of chapter 1 last week. Believe it or not, that's on par with 2017. What my plan is to get to the end of chapter 1 today, and then, so that we can sort of catch up a little bit, in your tutorials this week, your tutors will be delivering a small number of slides to catch us up into chapter 2 a little bit, because I believe those slides in chapter 2 are pretty relevant for assignment 1. So it does make sense for me to deliver them next week, because you won't have any time to complete your assignment. So it's not going to be a lot. It's not going to be 2 hours of lecture in your tutorial. At most it'll be 1 hour. We'll see how far we get through today. Launceston, no, Keenan's typing, not Launceston. So I'll just ignore whatever comes up next after that, right?
Yeah, probably.
Probably. Okay, so we're jumping in at slide number 7 in chapter 2. So I'm skipping a couple of slides here because they're just, we don't have time to deal with them, and they're not particularly relevant at this point. So we're talking about interaction design. That's what we're doing all semester, but in case you have forgotten, with all the confusion, we're talking about interaction design. I want to pose a question to everyone first before I talk about this slide. Can you design a user experience? Yes or no? No. I asked this last week, didn't I? And you remembered. You guys are awesome. We can design for an experience, but we can't design an experience. So the example to try and stick in your mind is me standing on a chair. Okay? I'm sure there'll be an exam question in this vague vein, and you'll mention that Lindsay stood on a chair, and that'll be worth at least 1 mark. But that's exactly right. Lots of people in the audience said no, you can't design a user experience specifically, but you can design for an experience. The important other side to that is that you can design for a bad user experience. Not intentionally, usually, but you can design for a bad user experience. And the only real way to avoid that, from my perspective, in my humble opinion, is that we need to do usability testing, which we'll totally get to this semester. So when we're talking about what to design, we need to take into account a lot of things. This slide looking reasonably similar to assignment 1's specification, the thing that I want you to think about a lot. And it's a little bit difficult to sort of teach you how to take into account who the users are and what activities are being carried out and what interactions are being taken place, because that's different for absolutely every single context and should be potentially different for every single one of your ideas for assignment 1. So you need to try and extract this data. So depending on working out who your users are, we can try and get this from demographic data, perhaps. What's another way that we could work out who our users are? Sorry, I missed that. Interview? Yep, that's right. How would you conduct those interviews? Yeah, that's right. Face-to-face, or it would again depend. The answer usually is it depends. So an example to run with what you've said there of doing interviews, if we were in a workplace environment and we knew that we wanted it to be our gadget to work in the university lecturer workplace, we would go to that workplace and we would interview lecturers to see what kind of people were there, what activities they're carrying out, and what interaction is involved in their day-to-day, at least in this case. What other things could we do instead of just interviews?
Look at existing products and see who their user bases are.
Absolutely. So we could look at existing products and see what their user bases are. So some people have already done this demographic data market analysis for you. There might be subtle differences between your product and the other product. So that, you know, sometimes there are pitfalls to that approach, but that's good. Any other approaches? Survey, yes. I'll treat that similar to interviews. Another approach is to literally just go to the location and observe them. You don't even have to interact with them in some cases. So you could go in there with your clipboard or no clipboard, because people will know they're being observed if you're standing there with a clipboard, and write things down or make notes in some way. When I talk about that idea of not having a clipboard, and some of you laugh, it is funny, but there is a term called the Hawthorne effect. Hawthorne effect, that's right, isn't it? Where people know they are being observed and they will act differently. So sometimes it is better to act like a spy, do this covertly, you might get more realistic data. Sometimes it's not even a matter of just individual users. Remember, so some of these slides might be a little bit old, even though they keep on being updated, but we talk about an individual user doing interaction. What about users doing things in groups? Often cooperation, competition, and just general working togetherness, that's a term I just made up, believe it or not, could be something you factor into your design. So some of you might already have your idea about your artifact. Keep on forgetting that word, really annoying. Think about maybe the implication that people in a workplace work together in collaborative environments a lot. That there's more than just one user at any one point in time. Maybe you could get them to work together. Maybe that could improve your idea. Or maybe you have to factor that in some way. What do we need in order to... It's an interesting point here to say we need to optimize the interactions that users have with a product. How do we optimize that? What do we need to be able to think about the users in this way? We need empathy, perhaps. Yeah. We might need knowledge of... sorry, there was an exclamation mark from Launceston. I don't know how to parse that. I don't know what... Lindsay.exe has stopped responding. I don't know what's happening there. I'm just going to leave that alone. Sorry, we might also just need knowledge of the area. So if that knowledge could be knowledge that you have yourself as the researcher / designer, or it's extracting that knowledge from actual experts. And that could be going online and searching, which is probably all you'll have time to do for assignment 1. Or it's going and talking to an expert in the field. Someone who knows about workplaces, I guess. It's not a great example for this one, but you know, talk to the boss, the person who has oversees them every day. So we're talking about understanding the user's needs. So we need to take into account what people are good and bad at. And this is not an easy thing to answer. Again, all of this depends on the context. Some examples are that we know, in general about humans as well, that what are some things that humans are particularly good at? I love asking you guys to answer these things so then I don't have to talk as much. So just humans in general, not necessarily workers. Clearly not good at responding to instructions. That's fine. We're really good at pattern detection. We're really good at recognising faces, communicating in a natural way. They're things we're good at. Stuff we're not so good at is perhaps doing maths in our heads. I'm a prime example of that. If anyone goes to my computer graphics lectures in the morning, I try and do some maths in my head and I go, oh, I have no idea. It's because I'm not a computer. So depending on these capabilities and limitations of our people, we can take away some of the burden on the user perhaps. So if we can remove some of the calculation in something, I'm just using broad examples here. Yep, that's gone forever. If we can get the computer to do calculations for us instead of relying on the human to do that, which they're not good at, that's possibly a good design decision. Why might we consider what people currently do in their workplace? Launceston might be saying something, but my computer's locked out. Hang on. Cool. It's all right, I'm pretending they are while I try and unlock my computer. There we go. So, I tried my best, stalling there. Maybe we don't want to disrupt the way that people currently do things. That's a pretty key word there. We've heard of disruptive technology, perhaps. So disrupting things can be a good thing, but in other times, they're not. It depends. Everyone's favourite word, it depends. If we don't disrupt too much the way things are currently done, then perhaps people are more likely to accept the gadget that we're introducing into their lives. So even thinking about the workplace, if we're disrupting their workflow on a regular basis, people might not accept this new gadget and maybe they will reject it. We might also think about why we might help people with the way they currently do things in order to make things more efficient for them. So if we identify that the way that people are doing things is not efficient, and we can come up with a way that speeds up this task, then we're clearly making them more efficient. Any other points to make here? A lot of what this slide refers to, yeah, it does say it actually, is that this last dot point is sort of disjoint from the others. So these 4 points are things that we should tend to do. And this last one, if we use tried and tested user-centered methods like user-centered design or human-centered design, then we will be doing these 4 things because they're part of user-centered design. So it's a little bit of a strange last dot point there. An interesting example, I guess, of talking about what people are good at, what most people are good at or bad at. Who has seen Minority Report? Yeah, a few people. So the example in that is that we've got these sort of see-through displays and all of our interaction is by putting our hands up and dragging things, moving around, and I think it involves a fair bit of actual physicality that we drag something from one side literally to the other side of the room. And it involves us basically constantly having our arms up. And I've only had my arms up for about 20 seconds now, and already I'm tired. The people who designed, I know it's a fictional system, but the people who designed that system probably didn't have in mind the fact that most people, and a lot of office workers perhaps, are not good at physical activity all the time and keeping their arms up without resting. So people might look at Minority Report as an awesome example of interface design, but that's one flaw to it, is that you're standing there the whole time and you're constantly moving your arms. You will get tired using the system. These are some interesting quotes on what interaction design is. The first one is somewhat interesting because Priest, Sharp and Rogers are the people who wrote these slides. So they're pretty clear that they think their definition is pretty good. But also, if you read these out, and I'm not just going to read off the slides here, they're pretty broad descriptions. So when we're partaking in interaction design, these are our general goals, that we want to develop something that is usable. So this is a description here of what usability is, in one description of it at least, that something is usable if it is easy to learn, effective to use, and provides an enjoyable experience. What's another dot point that wasn't written here in this blue text? It starts with a U. It starts with U, giving me an answer. Usable? Or useful, perhaps, was the word you said. Yeah, totally said useful. It's guided you towards that. So just because something is easy to learn and it's effective to use and it's enjoyable, doesn't mean that it's necessarily a usable product, because what if it's just completely not useful? What if it's not actually something that helps us in our day-to-day lives? Then we might not use it. So usable doesn't always mean useful. In order to develop these usable products, we should involve users in the design process. So things that have already been mentioned, that we should interview them, we should take a look at the demographic data, things like that. We should observe them, we should spy on them. If we involve users, we're more likely to make something that is usable and useful. So interaction design, I've said, is quite broad, and it sort of covers these forms of design. And so there are other terms that you might hear in this space, and these sort of just emphasize what we're trying to design. Are we designing the user interface for a product? Are we designing around the user's experience? Are we designing a specific web page? They're all quite a large umbrella term, and I'm going to skip through, I believe, a large amount of this part again. We skipped through this last time as well. But it's trying to show that HCI brings in information from, or knowledge from, a lot of areas, and actually outputs a lot of information as well. So we pull knowledge from academic sources. So what is ergonomic, or the psychology, or of the way we think. We learn about engineering aspects and bring that in. Or we also learn from design practices as well. So what's aesthetically pleasing, or what is popular, things like that. And then we have HCI itself is one part of interaction design. But I'm mostly going to skip over this. These slides say the same thing as that diagram, so that's why I'm skipping over them. However, one thing to point out about all this, we saw a lot of different disciplines working in HCI. So what you would find in the real world is that we're working with experts, we're working with users, we're working with other designers, we're working with programmers. There's a lot of different skill sets and overlap between all these people, sometimes not that much overlap. And so we end up with a lot of different perspectives and ways of talking about things. Oftentimes in multidisciplinary teams, just talking from my own experience here now, is that we have different words for the same thing. And so one early step of this process when working with a multidisciplinary team is coming up with a common language to be able to communicate with your other researchers, other designers. Even communicating with the user is difficult because if you took one of our design principles and walked up to a user and say, do you think this user interface has good visibility? And the user goes, I don't know what you mean by visibility, and it's a little bit tricky. So you have to use lay language with users, and otherwise come up with a common language with yourself and the other experts from all those other fields that we just saw. So of course multidisciplinary teams have advantages and disadvantages, that we can come up with a lot more different ideas, a lot more different designs, but it is difficult to communicate. So it can slow down progress at various points and unexpected points. skip over some of these as well, just in the interest of catching up. So when we talk about the user experience, we're talking about how the product behaves and how it is used by people in the real world. So again, we can design a user experience. We can't design a user experience. We can only design for one. So how we think the system will work and operate doesn't really matter. It's how our end users perceive the artifact that really matters. So again, it comes down to trying to assess what people think and feel about a system. Hopefully by this point you're understanding that the sort of testing that we might do here is more about how people interact and how they feel and how they perceive a piece of software, as opposed to what you might see in other units. So what you have seen in other units is that we have very rigid testing outlines that say, does the program with this input give this output? Did it do that? Did it succeed at that? Excellent. We've got a piece of software. Let's ship it. That's what some of your other units might say in terms of your testing stuff. Whereas the sort of testing we'll talk about in this unit is a little bit harder to define, I guess. So I'll pose this question to you all, because the slide is. Why was the iPod user experience such a success? And when I talk about the user experience, again, it's not just what's on that little screen. It's the entire package and all of the bits and pieces that go in it, without giving away too much of some of the responses I'm after here. So why do we think the iPod was such a great success?
It doesn't have unnecessary things on it.
That's right. It doesn't have.
Really good to play music.
Yep. It basically had, one purpose, and it achieved that purpose pretty well. Although I think the later iPods tended to start to have like calculators and stuff in that. It wasn't really much of a problem, but especially since they'd already built up a brand with these early iPods that were just trying to do music. What else did they do right, do we think? Yeah? Sorry, there's... Yes?
They were cool.
They were cool, absolutely. I honestly was looking for that answer. In that they thought about how the product might be used in the real world in terms of who their users were. They were clearly after trendy young people. I can't say millennials because I don't think that was a term back then, right? But maybe we're after that. One aspect of that is the awesome white headphones that they had. At that point, all the headphones on all of these devices were pretty much black, and suddenly it was a trendy and cool thing to have the awesome white headphones, and they lent into that heavily with their advertising. I think we can all probably remember the advertising of the black silhouette of a person listening to music, and all you can see is their white headphones. They were communicating people that, hey, this is cool. This simple change was cool. They probably artificially upped the price of those headphones as well. They're not overly amazing headphones, but by bringing in maybe a little bit of scarcity or increasing their perceived value to people, they were able to do that. Hey, half the answer's on the slide. Gosh, what am I doing? Troy says from Launceston that it was all about the click wheel, the little spinner thing that you had on there. There's another hand at the back about why the iPod might have been such a success. Yep.
They were very portable, unlike carrying around a blue box.
Yes, that's true. So they were very portable for those on the recording. So it's difficult to design for this, but Apple's a big company. They did a lot of research to be able to accomplish this effect, and I don't think it was a sure thing when they decided to launch all this, but hey, it worked out, so we can use it as a good example. So some of you might recognise some of the points on this slide from your other units. Establishing requirements, it's is a thing that we need to interact with the user to work out what they want, rather than just saying, oh, I've got this idea and shove it at people and see if they like it. I suppose that is one approach, but very common is that we try and establish the problem space. So we talk about with our users what could be improved in the context that we're talking about. So what is an inhibitor to you doing exercise in the workplace? And why would you want to do exercise? Developing alternatives, so coming up with ideas that try and meet those requirements, and prototyping these. So developing the ideas on paper and writing them down in a Word document or something is all well and good, but this concept of prototyping, which some of you have seen already in the mobile development unit, is super important. It's a low-cost way of putting together our idea and then testing it without going all the way. So an example of the prototype was our answering machine using the marbles. We talked about how you don't have to develop all of the fancy software and hardware that is needed to make that prototype work. We don't need to sense the weights of the bowl or the colours of the bowl. We don't need real messages in a prototype. One prototype of that could have all that, but it costs way too much, usually. Whereas we could make a simpler, lo-fi prototype and evaluate that with our users. We might want to do multiple alternative prototypes. So can anyone tell me from the mobile unit why we might do multiple prototypes? Looking at you guys, pressure's on. You literally had an exam question on this. People can see different approaches to certain problems. Anything else I want to talk about on this slide before I move on? Apparently yes, actually. So when we talk about evaluating, I'll just mention it again, that we're not talking about technical functionality. So in this unit, when we do our evaluating assignment, which it would be assignment 3, prototyping and all of this stuff is assignment 2. When we talk about evaluating, we're not talking about just, does it function? We're finding out, does it work for the user? In that, do they find it easy to learn? Are they able to use it efficiently? And is it enjoyable to use? Things like that. And we've already talked at length, or not at length, but we're pretty clear on the idea that things like surveys and interviews could be ways that we find out about this. Also, just timing, how long it takes them to complete a task. Hopefully we'll talk about test tasks in this unit, but we'll see. But you give people a task to do, and we would record how long it takes them. And you might record this for one prototype, record it on another prototype, and maybe third or fourth prototype, and see which prototype has the fastest results. So who gets, if that's your heuristic for the prototype being good, you work out which one people were able to use quicker. So users should be involved in the development of the project. Otherwise you'll end up with a product that people hate. Iteration is an important thing to do here. So not only do we try and develop multiple prototypes that have similar functionalities, but also we might evaluate one prototype, realise that there are these limitations to our prototype. So the user might give us feedback to say, all of the buttons are way too small, I have fat fingers, what are you doing? So your next iteration of the prototype might have larger buttons. Trivial examples 101. But you might go through a series of iteration, and that'll be something we'll look at in assignment 2, is that one way that you can submit your multiple prototypes is that you show how your prototype changed over time. Or you can take the approach of multiple similar functionality prototypes. Both ways are fine and will mark you similarly, exactly the same, I mean. So why on earth might we actually do this? What's another reason that hasn't really been identified on these slides that we might involve users? So think about some of the things that have been written on here. We're able to meet their needs, meet their goals, everything's clearly documented and agreed upon. But why else might we involve users in every step of our interaction design process? Marketing. So can you expand on that a little bit? I think I get where you're coming from, but...
Keeping the target audience involved throughout the development keeps them more enticed to your product specifically.
Absolutely. So for the recording, Keenan said that keeping them involved in the development throughout the entire development sort of keeps them interested and engaged with the project. That's basically what he said, in better words than I could do. He should lecture this. This is an excellent point, and an example of that would be Kickstarter. Would you agree? Yeah. So in a lot of cases, who's heard of Kickstarter? Just, yep. So Kickstarter is a crowdfunding thing for those of you who were too lazy to put up your hands, and now you're getting a description of Kickstarter. So Kickstarter is a form of people pitching their ideas, getting the crowd, so you guys, to give them money to promote, to develop their idea further. So usually at the point that they put it on Kickstarter, it's not finished, and there becomes a relationship between the designers, the developers, and their Kickstarter backers. So speaking from experience with Party Golf, a great game available on PS4, is that we did a Kickstarter for that project, and the game was shaped by our Kickstarter backers because they were literally invested in the project. Not in a huge way because it's not a large amount of money and they're not shareholders or anything like that, but those users were invested in the product, and so we not only shaped the product to what they wanted, because they were the people who were saying, we are the type of people who will buy this product, we also kept them engaged from a marketing perspective, to bring us back to what Keenan said. So we gave regular, thank you for posting Party Golf on the Discord, Keenan, very good. We gave regular updates to users to say how we had changed the project, what we had added, and we made sure to make it clear at every point that this idea was contributed by this user. So people could see examples of the project being shaped directly by the users. What's another reason? So marketing wasn't one that I had sort of anticipated, but it was an excellent one. It's somewhat similar to what I started to describe there, but I didn't use the word I'm looking for. What's another reason? Why would we go to this length?
They're the ones ultimately who's going to use it.
That's right. And so that's sort of already been explained, but yes, so for the recording said that these are the people who are ultimately going to use it, not us. They have different characteristics to us, so of course we want to involve them and understand their needs. Any other suggestions? Launceston, this is your chance to beat Hobart. I'm keeping track. I've got a little app on my phone, on my thing here saying who's winning. All right. It starts with an O, if people want to take a guess. No, I won't waste too much time on that then. So the word I'm looking for is ownership. So if you have users that are involved even from the very start, or even just at various points of software development, though they might just be office workers or someone else, they're not in software development, but if they're being consulted and asked about their opinions and feelings throughout the entire process, the end product, they will have a feeling of ownership over the product. I say product, replace that with artifact, whatever. If they do that, they're perhaps more likely to use it, for sure. Right? So not just because we've designed for them, but if they feel ownership over it, they're more likely to use it. But also they're more likely to become what's called champions of your project. So champions can mean a very specific thing, that you actually get end users to talk to other users and promote the product and do some of your work for you. So they interview are the people in the workplace for you and report back to you. That's a very specific term of what a champion is. But also people who feel ownership over your product might be a champion for your product just naturally because they've been involved in it. They know that this brand new system that's coming up is going to be really awesome. So to use an example, or to destroy an example, in that we've got a new staff intranet coming up. Ultimately it's going to be pretty crap, I'm pretty sure of that from what I've seen. But let's imagine that it's not crap, and what we were seeing from our product champion, James, that we were seeing amazing stuff go, oh, this portal is going to change the way that we interact with staff resources. James would have known that beforehand when he was having internal meetings with the designers, doing user-centered design, and then he would mention it to his colleagues, saying, wow, we've got this awesome staff intranet coming up, it's going to be really good, it's going to revolutionise our workflow, and things like that. And he acts as a form of marketing to the other users. So, ownership and the concept of being a product champion is something that isn't mentioned on these slides, but I think is super important. Let's just take a quick look at where we're at for if it's break time or not. Yep, let's take a, I don't know, yep, let's take a 5-minute break so that we can get this thing done. Cool. We'll be back at a little bit after 2 o'clock. Yeah, no, it's strange, right? No idea. Okay, everybody. I promised a 5-minute break, and I'm delivering a 5-minute break. Excuse me up the back there, guys. I can see your back. It's not very good when you can only see my back. Very good. Okay, let's crack on and try and get to the end of chapter 1, and then that way in your tutorials you'll be able to start chapter 2. Alright, so we've talked just briefly about why we might go to this length in terms of providing users with ownership, and it allows us to understand what people want. You know, not everyone is the same, not one size fits all. We might have to correct any assumptions that we have made. So maybe in your assignment 1, you'll talk about some of the assumptions that you've made. You'll know why you'll be talking about assumptions, because in chapter 2 we're going to talk about assumptions, and you'll easily identify that these are things that we should talk about in assignment 1. So you know, we might have some incorrect assumptions, and so it's not always the case that, you know, old people need big fonts. Maybe your particular set of old people that you're designing for are much more tech savvy, or they have better eyesight than you really thought they had. So this process will let you identify some incorrect assumptions. We talked already a lot about people's sensitivities and their capabilities. Or at least their capabilities. I talked about I'm not capable of keeping my hands up the entire time. I'm barely capable of standing up for 2 hours. Lectures are really hard. But maybe their sensitivities. So an example of that in Australia is for Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people. They have sensitivities to imagery of people who are no longer with us. So if you didn't interact with your user group correctly, and you were designing some software for Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, and you didn't know that they were sensitive to this topic because maybe you're not from Australia, you've never heard of this concept, or you're just blissfully unaware of this, and then you include such imagery in your application, and then you go, well, why are they not using my app? Why have I got a big backlash? It's because you didn't participate in proper user-centered design. As one example, but it does happen. So cultural issues are a thing that happens. I won't really go too much into depth about this slide, mainly because it irks me, because you put the date first and then the month and then the year. Like, don't put a month before a date. Like, I don't care where you're from. I know Americans are like this, but come on, it's just logical. Put the date first. So I'm not going to give this slide the treatment that it deserves. But what it's trying to say is that both are okay as long as you show which one you're using in a sensible way. To answer this slide here in the interest of fastness, what I think is the answer to this question of why are products like the iPod basically universally accepted, I think it's because they tap into some of our universally similar things that we like. So the stuff that we enjoy, there's sort of a universal feeling that we all accept a lot of the things that the iPod does well. That's my really crappy example or answer to that one. But it's not always the case that we will make something that is universally popular like the iPod. And other things that the designers of the iPod may have done is that they might change the design depending on where they're distributing it. So maybe there's a version of the iPod that works in America that, you know, well, clearly it would have this idiotic date system, but aside from that, it might have some other design changes based upon the localization, the locale that it's put into. So cultural differences in our users is an important thing to think about, and I like my Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander example instead of this one. Accessibility, so that's at a different sort of cross-section of the people. It's not just where they're from, but instead maybe what impairments they might have. So colour blindness is the thing that we have to mention here, of course, is that we can't always rely on using colour to differentiate between things, specifically red and green. But also, if your product is likely to be used by people with impairments, think about alternatives that they can use. I think we probably should have an entire lecture on accessibility, so for now we're going to move on. But thinking about the same product in just in different areas, this one here is an online sales agent for IKEA called Anna, and so her name's the same in both of them. I think Anna, some people associate with being a Swedish-ish name, if that's a word I can use, Swedish-ish name. But also for the US version, I believe here they've gone with what might be generally accepted in popular culture as what a Swedish woman might look like. Have we got any Swedish women in the room? I'm feeling a little bit scared to continue on with this train of thought. Please don't kill me. And you know, I didn't make these diagrams, but clearly they're depending on their market that they've distributed this to. They know that their customers have this view of what a Swedish person might look like, whereas in the UK perhaps they're more sensible. Or maybe it's even just preferences of people in these areas about hair colour, things like that. Does anyone have any other differences they can point out on this slide that they can see, or things that they might think might be different in other areas? Because we've got quite a diverse group here in this room. So, you know, what might the version of the IKEA help centre look like in China, for example? Anyone want to hazard a guess? I'm not sitting here going, that's a right or wrong answer. I literally have no idea. It's possible even that, so IKEA went with the whole we're from Sweden thing, but maybe a help centre bot for something more generic that isn't sort of tied to a well-known location might have someone who looks more like they're from that area as the avatar. Someone who's more familiar in terms of what people see on a day-to-day basis as their image here. So when these slides are pretty amazing. They jump around to quite a fair few topics, but this is still introductory level to the unit. What are some of the goals that we hope to accomplish when we partake in user-centered design? We hope to, again, have an effective and efficient product, and we've talked a little bit about the difference between these, maybe not explicitly, but just because it's effective and we can do great things with it, maybe it's not efficient, maybe we can't do that in a fast way. If we can have both of these, this is great, but just because something's effective doesn't mean it's efficient. It's a little gotcha there, I guess. But it's safe to use, that it is useful, so utility, I guess. That it's easy to learn, and it's easy to remember how to use. That last point's a kind of interesting one, in that studies have suggested that we get distracted quite easily, that in workplace environments we can get distracted even every 5 minutes or less on average. So some people might say, oh, we're fully distracted from our task maybe every hour or something like that, something reasonable, but some studies have suggested that we get distracted every 5 minutes. Some of you can probably tell that I get distracted every 20 seconds. There's a word for that, but I won't use it, or at least a medical condition, and I don't have it. I haven't been tested. Let's move on. So we might talk a little bit about the learning curve of something. So if something is easy to learn, then it means that we can easily access a lot of the functionality of a product a lot sooner after having picked it up than if it was hard to learn. So if the early on functionality of working out how to even open up the menu on our app or something, if that is something that is an inhibitor to us using the rest of the app, and it's hard for us to learn how to access various things, then it's stopping us from being able to use the awesome things that our app can do. So even if our app was effective or it had good utility, if it's not easy to learn, then we can't access those things. And people have a short attention span. I know that because I'm a lecturer and I have seen students before. They have a short attention span, and so if it's not easy to learn, people will just reject things. But yes, that last point again about things being easy to remember how to use. So if you get distracted, see, I got distracted talking about being distracted. The whole point of me talking about being distracted was that if you get distracted and then you suddenly have to jump back into using the app, if it's not easy to remember where you're at or how to suddenly use what you're using, then you will lose a lot of time trying to catch back up. So it is an important distinction between something being easy to learn the first time and something that will stay in your brain. So you can learn something, but maybe you won't retain it. But if you can retain it, and it's easy to, and the system perhaps facilitates easy to pick upness, that's a new word that I've come up with again, then that's a separate topic. Lots of wonderful words on here that we might want to see our users describing our artifacts as. And lots of words that we don't want them to be described as. I don't have much to say about this slide, but something that I've just decided to talk about right now is that maybe when we've talked a little bit about having interviews with people, and so when we interview people and we get maybe a transcription back of what people have said, we type down what they've said and we read it later on, these are some keywords that maybe you would want to look for. That how often do your users use the word satisfying, or how often do they say that it was challenging or motivating? Maybe you need a different set of words, because a lot of these words, an end user is not usually going to say, I found this product cognitively stimulating. But, you know, things that line up to this, you could look for. So, I don't really know what this slide is trying to say. It's using a lot of words. So I guess it's referring to these terms that we've got back here, that we might have user experience goals as well as our usability goals. So is there a trade-off between these? Sorry, I'd forgotten this slide existed, so it tripped me up a little bit. So perhaps in the pursuit of making our software or our artifact fun to use, or making it provocative or thought provoking, then maybe we're unwittingly working against one of our usability goals. So these might be at odds with each other sometimes, that maybe in making it fun by suggesting that you go and do your exercise wherever you like, and suggesting that someone goes out and do it in the street, suddenly it's not very safe to use. Sorry, really terrible example, but sometimes these can be at odds with each other, is effectively all that slide is really trying to say. The measurability of these different things is different as well. So it's quite easy in some ways to measure the effectiveness or the usefulness of our artifacts, but perhaps try and work out how on earth you might measure fun. I've been asked how to do that a bunch of times, or I've asked myself, how do I work out if this game I've made is fun? The heuristics that we might use to measure that are a lot more difficult, in my opinion. There you go, we talked our way through this slide. Because this is the thing that I wanted to talk about today, is design principles. So this, again, going back to, you okay? The mobile unit is that we're going to touch on some of Don Norman's design principles, but not all of them. We're just going to look at a few of these. So design principles are effectively rule of thumb that you can use when analysing an artifact. So you can look at a system like Milo, or I could look at this lecture interface in front of me and assess how well it meets these design principles. So I can do that with things that other people have made. I can do that with stuff that I'm making, and I can use these rules of thumb to try and improve them as well, by getting feedback on how well does a system meet these design principles. So they're very generalized, and in some ways they are the do's and don'ts of interaction design. And they come from a mix of theory-based knowledge but also common sense. So one design principle is visibility. So we're talking about elevators again, second week in a row, but looking at this particular control panel for an elevator, maybe we won't know how does it work. So this isn't a very good picture. What we have over here I think is a keycard reader. What they're talking about here is that you get into one of those lifts that needs a keycard in order to access certain floors. And so, well, I suppose it's a good picture because you might get into this elevator and you'll press the floor that you want to go on. Well, for a start, in this picture you can't even tell what floor's what. So there's one. I didn't even notice that the first time I looked at this picture. How do we know exactly which floor is what? Maybe because this is a horribly cropped image, there are numbers here. But imagine that your lift didn't even have numbers on the buttons or numbers next to them. You didn't even know which button took you to which floor. Or that you had to count how many buttons up to get to your floor. The interface is not showing us what will happen, what options are available to me easily. But the thing this slide is really talking about, though, is keycard access. So you press a button on this elevator and nothing happens. You might try another button. Maybe the first button was broken, so you've got to take the stairs to do an extra floor. Nothing happens still at all. There's no visible indication of how to progress from here. How do I get somewhere else? So it's not written on this slide, but visibility refers to, does the interface tell the user what their options are? It's telling us what our options are in terms of what floors we can go to, but it's not telling us that we have to scan a keycard here. Well, it's not telling us in a way that's easily visible. This is it's a really terrible image that they've used here, in my opinion. But to make this interface more visible, we might have a flashing light or something on the keycard reader that makes it clear, makes it visible to us that the first step in using this system, our first and only option, is to scan a keycard. One note that I've got here is that who remembers in older websites the concept of hovering over links to get more information? Yeah. So that went on for quite a time in websites and still is, but there's, people are now sort of catching on to the idea that that's not the most amazing way of interacting with a website, mainly because it doesn't work with mobile phones properly, is one probably practical reason, or Don Norman's principles are catching on like wildfire. So when you hover over a link on a web page, that information and the options in there are hidden to you until you hover over it. So your set of options or things that you're doing is not visible to you, and if you're hiding something in the hover menu that is important to the user, then that's kind of breaking this design principle of visibility. However, you might want to deliberately break this design rule. So these are rules of thumb, and they're made to be broken, I guess, in some cases. So maybe you want to hide all of the really advanced options on a website from someone so that they can't easily get to it because it's an overwhelming interface and it's too easy to break things. The example there, I guess, is in Party Golf again, that we hide a lot of the options that you can do in that game. So we have over 300 options that you can use, but we don't make them all visible to the user at the start. We just provide what we think are the most accessible options straight away, and there's only about 4 of those. In fact, even one level up, there's just one button to start the game, and you don't get a choice of what your options are. And nowadays there's a bit of a trend towards interfaces which don't tell you what your options are. This is kind of minimalism, I guess, that we're trying to make things as clean and tidy as possible, but in doing so are perhaps making options less visible. So that trend is a little bit at odds with visibility as a design principle. Any questions about this or comments about visibility? Oh, so there you go. I didn't even understand the picture. That's how not visible it was. This line is a thing that you insert your keycard into. Is that obvious or visible to you at all? So what we just saw there, me trying to explain my way through that image, was an example of the user interface being not at all visible. Some of you might treat that as, is it intuitive? But that's a different topic. So, how could you change this so you could make the card reader much more obvious? Maybe we provide a message to people when they get into the lift, so maybe we have a weight sensor that says, please scan your card. Who can tell me what's wrong with that idea? Yep, that's right, disabled people, or people who are deaf, they won't hear that cue. What's another instance though that people might not hear that cue? Yes, that's an excellent one. Yep, so people wearing headphones will not hear that cue. Another one might be that there's already... I'm going to let Launceston answer this, because they're typing. Now's your chance, Launceston. Francis is typing. They're still typing. Some people don't understand English. Hey, that's a good one. That was one that I wasn't going to do. So how do you localize that message? Do you say the message in every possible language or the most likely languages? Maybe not. That was an excellent one, Francis. I'm glad we waited. It was worth the wait. Another one might be, what if the lift is full of people that are all talking to each other and you're trying to get to your floor but you've got no idea? That cue is not going to be of any use there. So that's an idea. Hey, they said which language on the slide. You're just reading off the slide. Well done. Though. That's good. A big label next to the card reader is a good idea. Things like that. What else have I got? You could have a flashing light. Blind people struggle with that. Yeah, so it's an interesting example, and I think it was well explained because we saw ultimately what it was with the slidey thing. What do we do in this particular example? So this is a faucet. Why are all these pictures so bad? I don't know. This is a faucet that automatically turns on when you walk up to it. So I think it's in the pursuit of getting people to wash their hands more. And so, you know, if the tap already turns on for you, then that's one less step and you go, oh, I may as well wash my hands now, I guess. However, as you can see on the label here, it says just walk up to the sink, and when you walk away, it'll automatically turn off. And then it tells you black clothing does not operate the faucets. What on earth do you do if you're wearing black then? Well, that's one option. For the recording, it was that you strip. I don't know. I will repeat anything you say, apparently. Maybe there are maybe the faucets are still there, like the knobs, but so maybe, again, the cropping of this picture is being a little bit deceiving, but yeah, it's not this interface. So this is still an interface with a computer. It's a really simplified one. It is not making it clear to us what our options are. So remembering what I said, that visibility is that the interface shows us what our available options are. And it's not telling us. It's telling us what we can't do. Well, it's telling us a problem, but it's not telling us what to do about that. So people with black clothing get dirty hands. Feedback is a good one. So this is, you know, when there's an action, let's have a reaction. It's not that. But it's that when we can send information back to the user about something that has been completed or that, you know, their action has been accepted. So this is a pretty simple example that when you click on a button, we get a sound or a red highlight. This sort of covers a little bit of our bases of deaf people, stuff like that. But another example of feedback, let's just make sure it's not on the next slide. I know what my example was, but I just want to make sure I was on the right page. I haven't missed anything that's important to you guys. Progress bars are a form of feedback, and we could talk at length about these. That we think about progress bars. It tells you how far through an action we are. So in a game, it might tell you we're 20% of the way through loading the level. Now we're 30%, 40%. But also, progress bars could just be the fact that there is a spinning wheel that shows up. So once you've clicked on a button to say load level in the game, and your game takes maybe even 10 seconds to load a level, the designer might think, oh, it's okay, 10 seconds is nothing. The user can just wait, because that's not a very long loading time. Most games take 2 minutes to load their levels. If you don't show any form of feedback that they have clicked that button and that the game is loading, then your user is going to be pretty confused. They're going to think the game's crashed. Some people with their short attention spans won't even last 10 seconds before they go, oh, it's crashed. Alt F4. Speaking from experience as well, that sort of rule that your application, so I'm talking about applications now in this instance, doesn't provide feedback to the user when a loading operation is going on, will make you not get accepted by certain software companies that distribute games. So if you want your game to be somewhere other than Steam, for example, and you haven't thought about some of these principles like feedback and met the requirements that are given to you, then you will not be accepted onto platforms other than Steam. What else have we got to say here? So talking about that elevator example again as well, we had the keycard and then you've got to press a button. Feedback could be provided to the user to say, we've accepted your card. Because if you just scan the card and there's no sound or light or something, how do you know that you've progressed to the next step in this relatively simple interface to press a button? So you would consider doing sound again, or a light, or some combination, keeping in mind the people with disabilities. So keeping in mind accessibility, let's say that. So there's some examples of using sound, highlighting, animation, and hopefully we'll look at material design sometime this semester, because they have some pretty good uses of feedback and other design principles. I'm going to shoehorn material design into this unit somehow, even if it's the last thing I do, because it's so good. Constraints are an interesting one. So in the real world we have constraints. I can't walk through this wall, so I'm constrained to being in this room. So that's an amazing example of a physical constraint. You want to watch me walk through the wall? I'll try my best. No? Stop it. Stop looking at me. However, on a computer, we sort of have to introduce artificial constraints. So these constraints help the user from making mistakes. So in some ways, this can mean that an interface is forgiving. I don't think we talk about that today, but by limiting the number of options that users can have at certain points, then we can make an interface forgiving. So an example in the real world is parking meters. So parking meter machines, for some reason they don't want lower denominations of money, so they don't want our 5 and 10 cent pieces. I don't know why that is. Does anyone know why? No? I thought I could learn something from you guys. They will physically stop you from being able to put those in. The machine won't accept those and it'll pop those coins out. That's a constraint in that interface, so that you can only put in higher values of coins. Starting to think maybe why they might do that. But moving on to a more computer-based example, think about when we're in PowerPoint. Hey, we're in PowerPoint, let's try it. What's all this? What do we call this? Icons, that's certainly I'm pointing at icons. But what is different about these icons that I'm mousing over compared to something over here? Yep, they're greyed out. They are, the term that we use in programming, I guess, is that they're disabled. But, yep, they are I'm restricted from pressing them. there is a constraint here that I can't change the font size because that would be a mistake. I can't change the font size or the font if I don't have something selected. By performing an action here, now I have got less constraints. Here's an example of visibility, the ribbon. Can't get to anything. Don't know how I feel about the ribbon. I'm still on the fence about that. I generally like the ribbon and its customization, but yeah. Anyway, sliders are another example, or at least scroll bars. I can't scroll past the start and end of my slideshow because the program would crash if I could do that. It doesn't make sense to get the interface into a state where I can see slide -1, for example. So this scroll bar, which is right on the edge of my screen, is using a constraint here. And we'll talk a little bit more about how this is also a metaphor, but that'll be the tutors saying that, not me. Yeah.
Lindsay,
Yes.
back to the constraints thing.
Yes, sir.
So like Kindle e-readers, the ones with e-ink,
Yep.
they don't have any apps or anything on purpose. Would that be kind of like that? 'Cause
They don't have any apps?
Or yeah, it can only read books.
I guess you could consider that a constraint. Maybe they deliberately designed that to not have apps. Yep, so that it just serves a single purpose. So that people know what they're getting out of that interface. They can't accidentally download a virus. You know, I would consider, yes, that the e-Kindle, you said, I'm saying this for the recording.
Yeah, the one basic, not the tablet ones.
Yeah. So the more restricted Kindle devices that don't have an app store, those might be constrained. And thinking about it, they're sort of base models, and then there's higher level ones. Is that correct? That do have an app
the
store?
ones with the e-ink screen.
Yeah,
They've got,
yeah.
like ones with e-ink screens.
Right.
And then, like,
So that might be a technological difference, but also the base models of those might be aimed at certain type of consumers that they don't want the complexity of an app store. They just want an ebook reader. Whereas power users, or at least more advanced, can you have a power user of an ebook? I don't know. Might want apps on there. So the higher level ones perhaps. But I don't know if the distinction of the e-ink is just a result of the technology.
The designers said in an article that they didn't want people checking Facebook. Because
Right.
you can't do that when you're reading a real book.
All right, that's cool. So for the recording, they designed the Kindle to not have apps to prevent the amount of distraction you could have. Effectively, when you're reading a book, you don't want to turn the page and get to Facebook. That's an excellent point. Well made. Yep, we'll spend not too much time on this slide. I think I know how to use this interface, or I know where the mouse plugs and the keyboard plugs. So I'm not sure who wrote this. I don't know. I think that you could plug the mouse into this one and the keyboard into this one and feel safe that you've got them right. I don't know. But it's interesting to point out that they could improve this design with some simple photoshopping to put icons right next to the locations you might plug them, or use colour coding. Colour coding, of course, has accessibility problems for people who are colourblind. Maybe that's the point they wanted us to make with this slide. So let's move on. Consistency. So why might we want... So consistency is where our interfaces have similar operations and they are similar to use when we're doing those tasks. So we've used the word similar 3 times here. For example, whenever we do a command in a simple version of Word, then we simply need to know what the command is and what the first letter of that command is, and use Control-C, or control that letter. This lets our interfaces become easier to learn and easier to use. Why might we want visual consistency across our applications, even across platforms, for example? So this is a question I'm posing to you.
So the user only has to learn how to use the application once.
That's right.
Once they've essentially learned it, they don't need to. If it's different in all the different aspects of it, it just gets confused.
That's right. So it makes it easier to learn once they're... it means that it's easier for them to use when they're presented with a new scenario, because they can use what they have learnt in the past about an interface to say, okay, well, I know that most of the options I'm after are up in this top left context-sensitive menu. Whatever I'm looking for, it must be up here, or something like that. Another reason we might strive for consistency is a more vain reason, I guess, is branding as well. Recognition of our product across multiple platforms. So taking Word, for example, the colours of all of that software and the icons are all very similar to the colour and icons used on the mobile version of it. Having not used a lot of mobile Word, they've attempted to keep a lot of similarity between them from a branding perspective. I mean, the Word brand is pretty good these days, but other people who are trying to promote their brand or build up a brand might do this too. But certainly the main reason for consistency would be to make it easier to learn and use. Consistency can break down as per this example. I find this a trivial example, so we'll sort of move on from this. But when consistency breaks down, this can increase the burden on the user. And so instead of reducing the number of errors they make, they can end up with more errors. So we'll talk a little bit about internal, external consistency super fast. So internal consistency generally refers to something within the same application. So what Bryce was talking about there, that if we have a similar interface in one part of our application and then we're presented with a brand new experience later on in the application, so we're presented with the window for advanced formatting in Word, right? Using the most boring example I can. The way that that is laid out and the icons that we see on there, they're consistent with the icons that we see elsewhere. So to explain this a bit better, okay, so maybe I want to change my font, but then I can go to my advanced font settings. And okay, so this is an example of bad consistency. It's going to be a bit hard to show, isn't it? Yep, so I'll pin this. So keep a track of, stuff like bold and underline. We're used to these icons. Then when we have this version of it, how do I make this bold? Is it an option? Not really. Font style, yeah, there it is. So why a drop down here? Why not the same buttons? So I was opening this hoping for an excellent example of consistency. We've just seen a pretty crappy one. The only thing that is consistent, it's not even that consistent. The font color drop down uses the fill icon, whereas over here it was the A icon, which we're pretty used to knowing this is font color and this is filling in a thing. Why is font color using a different icon here? I honestly didn't plan this. This is ridiculous. So that is really terrible internal consistency right there. And so it made it, I suddenly couldn't make font bold anymore. I mean, I know it's not the normal approach to doing bold, but it seems an arbitrary choice there. They were probably trying to give me extra options beyond bold, but I think all we saw were the same options I have normally. External consistency is a different sort of topic, and it's based on the designer's preference, and we'll see an example of that here instead. We are used to this sort of layout on the left here for when we're using phones and remote controls, whereas on our computer keypads or calculators we see this kind of layout on the right. Who knows what we get when we go to a ATM machine? Do you notice the hesitation in your voice when you said the one on the left?
I don't think I'd even remember my PIN if not for like the pattern.
Yeah, that's right. What happens then? So we're pretty sure that we would usually get the one on the left. That's fine. What happens though if some designer went, oh, I really, really like the way calculators are laid out, and so they designed their ATM machine to use the one on the right? You're going to walk up to an ATM machine and you're going to get your PIN number wrong 3 times in a row and you're locked out. It hasn't happened to me, so clearly there's some kind of external consistency amongst ATM machine designers, but if they broke from this with no good reason, and I can't think of a good reason other than personal preference, your interface is not going to be very usable. Oh, why did I do that? Okay, so we've got 10 minutes left, and we have to talk a little bit about affordances. We can do this in about 10 minutes, but I'll ask the tutors to pick up a little bit of this where I left off. My original plan was that they would start chapter 2, but I'll give them a chance to just go over these last few slides, but I'm going to try and power through them a little bit here because there's one thing that I want to talk about. All right, let's do this. So, affordances refer to the way that an object shows people how to use it. So, a chair affords the idea of sitting in it because it's at a lower level. It's at somewhere that looks nice and comfy. That chair over there is looking really comfy to me. It's got a nice support to my back. I know that that's a chair and I know I want to sit on it right now. It's telling me, use me. It's not really telling me stand on it, but it could be as well, I guess. I don't know. It's late in the day now. And so what Don Norman does discuss is the design of everyday objects like that and how they are designed in a way that make it immediately obvious that we know how to use them. And my example that I'll use really quickly today will be door handles, because it's an amazing one. And so we can learn a lot about affordances in the design of our interfaces by stealing from everyday objects, taking the metaphor of things to make them easier to use. Yeah. All right, so let's really quickly look at that on Milo then. Yep, that's me. Okay. Can everyone see that this is a photo that I took this morning of a door in Centenary Building that we push to open?
At least some focus.
Yeah, that's because it's one of my photos. So this is an example of bad affordance. Can anyone tell me why you think that might be the case? This particular door handle? Yeah, I'm seeing you up there sort of making a shape with your hand that the recording can't see, that sort of talking about this hook that we've got here. Sorry? Yeah, that's right. So when we look at this, we look like we can clasp this with our hand and pull on it. So if there wasn't a word on this door handle, I would go up to this and pull on it to open the door. This is perfectly fine for the other side of this door, which is a pull. But I tell you, even this morning, I was walking behind someone and they tried to pull on this and I nearly crashed into the back of them. And then like 10 minutes later, I was using the door and I forgot. It takes me 2 or 3 seconds extra out of my day to go through this door because someone decided, oh, this looks really cool, and didn't think about the design of their everyday object. It's also somewhat of a fire hazard in that outward-facing doors, I don't know if this is law in Australia, but if there's a door that's meant to be a fire exit, you're supposed to be able to only push that door. Most people might realise that this is an outward-facing one towards the fire exit, so they will just push it anyway. People don't keep that rule in their head. If there was a real fire and there were about 100 students in Centenary 473, which is not supposed to be that many, and they all rushed towards this door, and the first person to get there got tricked up by this, and they went to pull on it, and then the other 50 people behind them crashed into the back of them, they'd all die, because some guy didn't design a bloody door handle right. So, whereas, if you even take a look at the door over there, which I know you all want to go through very soon, you can see that that's got one of those emergency exit bars on them. That design that you see on emergency exit doors is not an accident. When someone's in a stressed situation where the building's on fire around them, they will look at that and go, that's a handle, push that, and they'll smash on through that door and they're out of there and they're safe and they're not on fire. Because the door handle that looks like that gives a proper affordance to how to use it. There's only 2 ways to use most doors, push and pull. This one tells you the wrong thing and gets people killed. I think that's an excellent place to stop because then you can all use the door. So as I said, please do go to your tutorial this week because your wonderful tutors will deliver a small number of slides, but a useful number of slides for your assignment because I don't want you guys to get behind on that. Keep thinking about your idea. the whole tutorial is not going to be just a lecture, so there'll be a chance to think about your idea and develop your idea in that tutorial. So use that time because your tutor's there to talk to. Wonderful. Bye-bye. And thanks, Launceston. Hi mate, how's it going?
It's just enrolled in this class. So
Yep.
I just might need some slightly more clarification on the assignment one.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm slightly wondering if are we supposed to design an object that is supposed to motivate people in the workspace to get moving? So in that sense, are we supposed to focus on the interaction between the people and the object, or is it okay to design something that gets them moving, but it's more focused on the interaction between people and people?
That's fine. Yeah, if your gadget can promote people-to-people interaction and in some way, then that's great because people like to exercise with other people. Right? That's why people go to gyms. I mean, some people will go there and have their headphones on the whole time, but other people will go to the gym just to be around other people and maybe compete with other people, stuff like that. It doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone's a social creature, so some people hate everyone in their workplace, so you might want to consider that. You don't even have to design around that, but it's something to mention that if your gadget or artifact is heavily social, then maybe it won't work for everyone. But that's okay. If that makes sense. Yeah. Cool.
Cool, thank you.
Yep. See you, mate. How's it going?
Actually, I want to join this lecture first. I want to listen to the previous lecture. All those available in Milo?
Labelled them on Milo, do you say? Or
Because I have not attended previous lectures.
Yeah.
I just joined today.
yes, yeah.
Actually,
So
I
these
went
are
to
all
this,
on Milo.
Actually, I have gone to this rooms 209, but it was not there. I even not.
Oh, is this
received-
an old picture, or did you
Just
take that today?
received 2 days before.
Okay.
I didn't receive any mail regarding shifting of this lecture either.
Okay. Make sure that's us there. What I would suggest to you?
It's always going in this room.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, because I received this message and it's
Right.
still showing 209 is on.
What I'd suggest, you can either send me an email with that picture or send it to Erin because there might be other people in your situation as well.
Yes.
Just I'm a little bit concerned that maybe some people have missed
Yeah,
this thing.
they were just there was an actual meeting. I was just went
Yeah.
to the student advisor, and then she said it's shifted to physics.
Right, and so that system isn't up to date. We have a couple different systems.
And I want to listen to the previous lecture.
Yes, absolutely.
So where I can?
Yep. So I'll show you what you can see as a student because I've got a few extra things.
Okay.
What you can do is you go onto content,
Okay. Right.
and if you scroll down, the very last link will be lecture recordings.
Okay.
And you can click on that, and what you see is just this one. Okay.
Right.
This takes you to another website. It's
Yeah,
outside of Milo,
Right.
and there they all are. I'm going to label these as we go.
Okay.
The tutorial this week, I will get them to record it and put it on Milo as well. There will be at least one recording
And
of
there is one
this one.
assignment we have released, and we need to submit it by this. We need to just give our ideas first, or we need to just come with our assignments.
So this was what I was talking a little bit about at the start of the lecture, which was this sketch. So the stuff that I explained just then to everyone, were you there for that part? Or you missed this because
Yes, I have. But I just came from instructions. You were going with the instructions.
So I spent a reasonable amount of time on this part. This paragraph here is the most important part.
Can I have some little bit idea?
I can, and to support all of what I'm saying here, there is the lecture recording as well. So don't stress if you don't get everything you need from me right now. The important thing is that we've got a theme for all of our assignments this semester. So the idea is that we want people to get moving at work. We want them to participate in some kind of exercise or walking. It doesn't have to be, that they go and do push-ups. It might be that they just stand up because that's more than just sitting down.
Okay.
In some way at work. Whereas we're not talking about motivating them to do exercise, before work or after work at the gym or stuff like that. We're more caring about getting them to do a little bit of physical activity during the day. And so this sort of comes from the idea of office workers
Like
sitting
these
there.
days, people are putting some kind of mechanism on their arms
Yes,
to
that's right.
monitor how they have reduced their calories. Just
Yeah.
like just keep on moving.
Yeah,
While
that's
sitting,
right.
they just remind, I need to move. Or just
Yep.
take it.
That's right. So
That's
you
kind
would
of-
describe your gadget in terms of, you know, the thing that they attach. Maybe it is just working off an iPhone that connects to them. And you would talk about how it reminds them.
It's kind of
Things like
example
that.
we can
Yeah.
add in ours.
Yeah, that's right. And what we end up doing for assignment 2, if you ran with that idea of the thing on their arm, that's maybe got a touch screen interface on it, or
Yes.
even just, you know, some kind of
Speech
icons.
recognition
Yeah,
and-
lots of things.
Okay.
You'll prototype that in some way, whatever you like. And we haven't got that assignment spec out yet, but
Okay,
it's very broad.
Okay, whole module goes with that particular kind of idea.
Yeah, that's right. So you can work within that idea, and what we really care about. So even though the assignment is called a sketch,
Yes.
only 5% of the assignment is a sketch.
If
Really.
nobody is good in sketch, then
Yeah,
they
that's
can
right.
go with some motivational ideas or writings.
Yeah, it's mainly about the writing, and it's this paragraph here that's talking about demonstrating that you understand the people who are going to use it and where they're going to use it. Or, sorry, I should say the context, because the context is where, when, how, and why they will use it,
Yes.
and what are the impacts of these variables. And so I've sort of written this in a really broad way of where, when, why, and how, but hopefully some of the slides that we had today, you can see what sort of more specific questions we'll ask. And we're going to have a few more slides in the
Right.
tutorials this week
Right,
that,
right,
that
right.
help with that as well.
Right.
So that's the thing that most of the marks are for. Overall, 40% is that context, but also that seeps into having a good idea that matches that.
Description.
Mm. And also, you know, a little less, but why are we doing
If it
this?
seems to be motivative, then you can score 15%.
Just to point out, this is motivation in terms of not how do we motivate people to get
Okay.
active. It's more, what's your motivation for coming up with this idea? And it does say it. It says, provide a description of what motivated your idea. What was your inspiration, for example, or what's the problem you're trying to solve? Right? And so it can be relatively broad to get a pass to say people don't do enough exercise, people sit down all the time in their workplace, but maybe something more specific that we want them to, you know, why? What are the studies about that to suggest that people should
Right.
get
It should
moving around?
relate to generation of idea, just why this idea.
Yeah,
came
absolutely.
into
It's the generation of the idea, absolutely. So a description a bit of the problem space and then how you intend to solve it with your gadget,
Right.
followed up by, and I said that this sort of all mixes in, that the context. How does the specifics of where, when, why, and how people use this impact all of
We
this?
need to develop any gadget. We just need to write an assignment.
Oh, absolutely. You're writing an assignment, it's 500 to 750 words, and there's a sketch at most of that, you know?
It's fine. It's
Yeah.
good. Ideally, I think that I should develop a gadget.
No. So you can be very, like, you can come up with something really out there for this. It's fine because you're not making it. In assignment 2, you're not constrained to making it match this. You're not constrained to using this. You could use another group member's idea, but you could take your thing that gets attached to someone's arm, and you could just prototype the interface on that in PowerPoint or in an app. So if it is on an iPhone, you could make that app in Xcode if you have the skills. It doesn't have to function, but you know the screens could work. Or if it is just PowerPoint, it looks like the app.
Okay.